So now, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason. I'm going to give you a little introduction to Jason so you know, for those of you that don't know Jason. Jason is a 94 graduate of Alma College, was named Executive Director of HR Shared Services Team for Bosch in North America in 2013. In this role, Jason is responsible to launch and lead the HR services organization in the US and Canada, servicing 15,000 associates in over 100 locations across the region. He currently serves as a board member for the Global HR Service Organization at Bosch and is responsible for the Americas region, servicing over 42,000 associates. The Bosch Group is a leading supplier of technology and services with over 390,000 associates in 70 countries in 4 business sectors: mobility, industrial technology, consumer goods, and energy and building technology. Bosch's global manufacturing, engineering, and sales network covers nearly every country in the world, and their goal, I should say, is to develop innovative products and services that are invented for life. So really pleased that Jason has agreed to present the webinar this afternoon. I'm going to turn it over to him. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks so much, Bill, and thanks everyone for joining. And yeah, gosh, that sounds impressive. I just like to think of myself as a father, a coach, a dad, a husband, and a retired jungle gym, more often than a lot of the things that I do from a work perspective. One thing that I'd love to test, though, before we get started is let's test that chat window out. And I'd love to know just a little bit about each of you that's online to get a sense for why you came today. So what's your background? Are you currently a student at Alma? Are you a recent grad? Are you a longtime grad, like I see some of the folks here that I know from days gone by? And what drew you to want to come to this session today? So if you could try just typing that into the chat, and we'll make sure that that's working well for everyone today. And everybody will get a chance to see a little bit about why everybody else has come. And while that's coming in, it'll help me just to understand a little bit about people's perspectives and where they're coming from. I'll give a little bit of an introduction here. Because today we're going to talk about my systems, my methods that I've developed over the years to help get things done. And a lot of it comes from a system that some of you may know that's espoused by the David Allen Company. And it goes by the same name, GTD, Getting Things Done. And it's a method and a process that I came across maybe about a dozen years or so ago, because when I joined the Bosch Group, as you heard, it's a very large company of 400,000 associates worldwide in almost every country in the world. And the number of stakeholders and communication partners that I had was greater than I'd ever had in any other role prior to that time. And I suddenly found myself unable to succeed at the levels that I wanted to get things done. And it was a new feeling for me. Had never encountered that since graduating from Alma, and started this search for tools, methods, processes, shifts in my mindset to figure out how better to manage my personal productivity and my personal workflow. And what I'm going to share with you today are some of those methods and processes that I've evolved over time. And to get started, just a little bit of a storyline. It's just amazing how much communication goes on in the world today. I mean, when I researched this again to prepare for this workshop, I couldn't believe it. 225 billion email messages every day. That means over 2 million emails every single second, with the average office worker or knowledge worker receiving, well over 100 emails per day. I think that's pretty typical for me as well. I usually get and send each about 150 to 200 messages a day. And that's just from a work perspective, not counting all those other social media apps that you might be involved in, project management tools, whether it's Slack or WhatsApp or or. There's so many inputs coming to us, and it's really challenging to manage in what I like to call the age of overwhelm. And in addition to all those inputs, I ask you to think about, how many other lists do you maintain to keep track of all the projects that you have and all the actions that you have, or the open loops where you're waiting to hear back from other people before you can advance something that you're working on. If you were at all like me, this is maybe a dozen years ago, I had a pad of paper and, I would go to meetings and I'd be taking my notes, and there's actions hidden within that. Then I had a log for my phone messages. And then, of course, I had my email accounts. And then if you're on a major project, you've maybe got something in Microsoft Project or Excel that tracks all of those actions. And what I found was that with all of that going on, I just couldn't process it all. And so a little bit of a self-reflection question for you again. If you were to just look at your inboxes right now, how many messages are in there waiting to get acted upon? Is it 100? Is it 500? Is it 1,000? And the problem with that is that then what you spend your time doing, if you have lots of messages still in all your inboxes, if that's your method for managing your work, you end up having to read, reread, and scroll through them, search for them to find the actions that are buried within all of those. And it's a constant battle, right? Because the flood just keeps coming. And if you're at all like me, it's just enough to drive you absolutely crazy trying to figure out how to get it all done. So now, even though we're coming together to review some of the things that I use as part of my total productivity system, it's really a collection of habits and ultimately getting things done, right? Doing the actions. And it's not the system, it's not the tools that you use to get it done, but it's going to take time. For me, I would say it took about 6 months of constant daily practice, trying to change my behavior, trying to change my habits to adapt to a new style of working for me. And I still fall off the wagon every single day. And so I have methods and systems as well built into my schedule to help me try to get back on track and to stay on track, because in today's age, in addition to all of these inputs coming at us, one of the key measures of our productivity is how responsive we are and how we manage all of those inputs and either delegate them to others, get them done ourselves, and ensure that we're focusing on getting the right things done. So the key to this is to take what works for you. GTD, even in its purest form, if you take it out of the book, it's a lot of different habits, a lot of different processes. And the key is to find the things that work for you in your systems over time. And with that being said, we can maybe now dive into the detail and get a little bit started. So what's really the secret to all of this? Say 3 things. The first is to use a system, but keep it simple. If it's too complicated, if it has too many moving parts to it, you're not going to use it. And so you want to find that right balance between the amount of organization that it takes to keep track of all of your work with a system that's complex enough to handle all of the inputs and responsibilities that you may have in your work or in your life. The other thing is that you don't manage to priorities. You don't manage to projects. You manage actions. Some of you on the line here I know are from back in the time when I was at school, and what was really popular back then were the Franklin planners. And if you remember the Franklin planners, boy, everybody had to have one. And the Franklin system at that time really worked on trying to prioritize your work, and you'd work on your A1 priorities and then your A2 priorities and things like that. But ultimately, for me, I found that all I was doing was rewriting every day what my next priorities were, right? I'd carry them over from day 1 to day 2 to day 3 and still wasn't getting those things done. And part of that is that you don't really manage to priorities like that in the real world. You also don't manage projects, right? You have next actions that advance your projects or advance your key strategies. And you've got to boil things down to the smallest next action in order to really get things done. So use a system, keep it simple, manage actions, not priorities or projects. And then the last thing is that you got to get stuff done. right? You don't want to just move paper around. You don't want to fiddle around with your organizational system. You want to actually get the work done. So you want to actually make sandwiches, not just take the orders. So here's what the system looks like. It's got 6 main steps to it, from collection all the way through to review. And this document that's here on the right is something that's available online from the David Allen Company. It's their simple workflow for processing and organizing work. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through this step by step through each of these stages and phases. And so what I'd encourage you is, if you do have questions as we're going along, want me to slow down or address something in more detail, please do use the chat window. And I'd be happy to try to back up and cover it as we're going along, or let you know if it's something that's coming up on future slides in the presentation. Okay, so the first stage, collect. You've got to collect all of the inputs coming into your life. You know, one of the things that I've heard in a seminar is that the brain is for having ideas, not for storing them. They used to think that the brain could hold about 7 pieces of information, discrete pieces of information, in short-term memory at a time before you'd forget it. And that's why the legend goes that phone numbers were created with 7 digits, right? What they've learned, though, is that really the brain can hold about 3 things in it at once. And so you've got to develop a system where you actually can collect things in written form, so that way you don't forget them. Because otherwise, as you're walking to get a coffee or you're walking to get to lunch, you run into someone, they ask you to follow up with something or to perhaps send them something. And by the time you get back to your office, back to your desk, back to your workspace, the odds are you've probably forgotten what it was, if you don't get a habit of capturing everything, all of the inputs coming into your life. And so I used to carry with me something that I referred to as my poor man's PDA. And literally it was index cards cut in half with a binder clip that I would stick in my pocket with a pen. And I had that with me everywhere that I went. And I would capture any action needed to get into my system so that I wouldn't forget it. Now, as you go along here on the left, you'll see ultimately we're going to process it. We're going to organize it, ultimately get things done. But the first step is you've got to collect everything coming into your life. Now, today I don't carry a small notebook. I use my phone. I might take a picture of something. I might send myself a text. I'm big on using the transcription feature. So I'll just talk into my phone, send myself a text or an email, and then I have a habit then next that we're going to get to about processing. So the key is you want something that works for you, that's with you all the time, and allows you to capture all of the inputs coming at you from all over the place. The other hint here is that you want just as many collection sources as you need, but not more than that. So how many email inboxes and email accounts do you have? The key is to try to get them down to as few as possible. So that way you can manage these in this next phase most effectively. And if you've got lots of different sources of capturing information, it becomes more complex and just takes more time. So just as many capture tools as you need and not more. Okay, what the heck is this processing phase? And I like to say that it's more than checking, but less than responding or less than doing. So you've collected all of this input, and now you're going to look at it and you're going to say, okay, so what is it? What do I need to do with it? So you've got your inboxes. Maybe if you've still got incoming mail, you've got your inbox, you've got your voicemail, you've got various project management apps, and you've got to process that to 0 every single day. If you've ever heard of the concept inbox 0, it is achievable. And it's this process and method where you take all of your inputs and you decide what they are and what to do with them. And then you get them organized into your system for later action. Okay, so for everything that you're doing, you're asking basically this question: is it actionable or is it not? If it's something that I need to do, great, it's actionable. If it's not, delete it, get rid of it, or archive it for later action, or file it away. If you've got a filing cabinet and you use that kind of a method, great. If you've got a digital filing cabinet and you use Evernote or you use OneNote, archive it. Have a structure and a system for archiving for future reference. But the real key here is it actionable? Is this something that I need to do something with? Now, as you're going through this process, next we're going to get to organizing it. And so this last point here is important because if it's simple, if it's something that you can do in under 2 minutes, you should just get it done. Okay, it takes you longer to organize it and come back to it later than it would to just do it. So you should just do it. If you're going through your inbox and it's like somebody just needs a yes or no answer to something and you don't have to do any research, just reply. Away you go, you're done. Okay, then if some of the other choices here you can see, you can perhaps delegate it to someone else to get done. You can defer it, you do it later. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the methods that I use for organizing things that I'm going to do later. So things that I'm not doing right now because it's going to take 2 minutes or less. Another hint here is that almost always, whatever I think can get done in 2 minutes or less, almost never can. It almost always takes 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes. I at least am notoriously bad at estimating how long does something simple take. But the key here is if you think you can get it done quickly, go ahead and just get it done. Don't spend the time then to organize it and get it into your system. Now, the other thing that you'll maybe notice here as we're getting through these phases is we still, other than those 2-minute ones, we really haven't gotten anything done yet. And this is maybe a little bit counterintuitive as you're thinking about managing your work and getting more things done. All I'm doing so far is I'm collecting, I'm processing things, and now I'm going to organize them and plan them. And the real reason that this is a benefit is because it gets it all out of your brain, right? That you're not thinking about it, you're not worrying about what you're doing or not doing or missing, because you're starting to get it into a system that you trust, that you can always turn to decide what to do next. Okay, so we've collected everything, we've decided if it's actionable or not, and now we're going to go ahead and organize those things that are in fact actionable. And the key here is to group the results of this processing activity into a few key categories. The first is projects. These are projects that you're going to take on and you agree this is something that you want to do. Now, you might also have things that I like to call someday maybe projects or not yet projects. And so I actually have my projects list split into 2 things. Projects that I'm doing now versus projects that, well, I might get to if they become a priority in the future. It was a good idea, I don't want to lose it, I save it to my projects list, but I have this other subcategory of not yet projects. Calendars are things to be done on a specific day, at a specific time. Different productivity methods sometimes suggest that you block time out on your calendar to work on something specific. And for me, that method didn't work. I would always schedule over it, right? There was always a different priority that changed my mind about what I needed to work on at that particular point in time, or somebody would drop by the office, wanted to talk about a critical issue, and inevitably, it would get postponed and it would get moved on. And so if you're at all like me, what you really need to use your calendar for are things that must be done on that specific date or time. If it doesn't have a real deadline, don't put it on the calendar, okay? It goes to your projects list. Next are next actions. This is closely related to projects. So you don't do projects, you do an action. And the key here is that as you're reviewing your projects, you're deciding what's the next action to advance that to done. How do I move that project forward? Do I need to look up somebody's contact information, schedule a meeting with them? Do I need to develop a budget? Do I need to prepare a presentation? What am I doing really to get something done? So this is your next actions list. And then the last one here is waiting for. These are things that other people are doing that you care about following up on. If you don't care about following up on something, don't worry about it. It's not actionable for you, it's actionable for somebody else. You don't care about it, you don't need to record it. You don't need to put it into your system. This is really useful if you're working on a project and you need to ask someone for some data and you're waiting for them to come back. Put it on your waiting for list, because just like you, they have at least 120 to 150 inputs coming at them every day. And more than likely, they're not going to be as well organized as you are. And they may have made a commitment that they don't follow through on. And so this waiting for list helps remind me of the things that I'm waiting for other people to do. So that way I can periodically check that list and see, did they get back to me, yes or no? If you're doing this in digital form, You can use things like categories in Outlook. Categories for projects, calendar, next actions, waiting for. If you're doing this in paper form, which is how I started, I had a binder, and each section in that binder was a different set of lists. So I had a project section, I had a next action section, I had a waiting for section. And literally, it's just a piece of paper. All you're doing now is you're taking everything that you've collected, everything that you've processed and decided is actionable or not, and you're dividing it into these types of lists. And really, is it a project? Is it an action? Is it something that I'm waiting for somebody else to do? That's it. Now you've got yourself organized. And now you actually have to decide, what are you going to do when? Okay, so this is not something that's part of the GTD system. This is something that I've added, and you may have learned from other productivity systems. But each week, well, really each year, each quarter, each week, each day, you're trying to pick what are the things, the most important things that you need to get done in order to advance your key priorities. Because if you don't plan those things in, my experience suggests they won't get done. The whirlwind of your life, the whirlwind of your work life, your personal life, the urgency of things coming at you will prevent you from achieving your most important goals, because typically they're not urgent. They're important, but they don't have an immediate deadline. And so if you don't plan time to do those things, you won't ever get them done. So the key here is to pick your big rocks, the most important things you want to accomplish for the week, and you schedule those in. Every day, to get those big rocks for the week done, what is it that you've got to do today to advance that particular issue, that particular project? And then make sure that you get those things done, right? You do those first. Try to get them done early in the morning, so that way you can make sure that you're making progress on those things that are most important to you. And this is a strategy now that I think a lot of people are coming back to, because of the sheer volume of activities that come at them. Okay, so we've collected things, we've processed them, decided if it's actionable or not, we've organized them into our key lists, we've planned what we're going to do for the day, and of course now is the time to actually get things done. And here, again, there's a lot of research that suggests that multitasking is very detrimental to your productivity. And this is super hard. It's super hard for me because, again, you've got so many devices pinging you and advising you that somebody wants to talk to you, somebody wants you to do one more thing. And to focus on your key priorities and your key projects is really, really challenging. And particularly for really creative, deep work that you might want to do, you've got to really focus on something for at least 90 minutes to 2 hours, really, to make progress, to advance something. You don't do it in 5-minute sprints or 10-minute sprints. And so our current culture and our current mindset of all the social media apps and your inboxes and checking your inbox all the time really makes it hard to get those key priorities done. And so this is then where you've got to have time in your calendar, slack time, to be able to focus on doing what's most important on that particular day or at that particular moment. And when you get interrupted, as you inevitably will, research suggests that it takes a good 20 minutes to get back into focus and get back into flow when you get interrupted. The trick here is, if it's not an emergency, to write it back down so that way you can process it later. Get back to what you're working on, right? So if somebody comes and says, hey, Jason, could you send me a copy of that presentation that you just gave today? Say, great, be happy to do that. I'll get that to you, by this afternoon, end of the day. I write it down and I stick it back in my inbox. I haven't processed it, I haven't organized it, I haven't planned it. I've just gotten it out of my head so that I don't forget about it. And then wash, rinse, repeat, right? Now that you've gotten through your most important things, you've advanced your most important priorities, you can look back to your list when you went ahead and organized your list into projects and actions and waiting fors. Look to your list of next actions and pick one that you can do based upon where you're at and how much time you have available. So if you've got 10 minutes between meetings, what can you do in 10 minutes? Look to your lists that have already been filtered, already been focused down, so that way you don't have to think about all those thousands of things that are on your mind. this short list of next actions really helps you to prioritize what can you do right now based upon where you're at with the tools that you have, with the amount of time you have, with the amount of energy that you have to get something done. Focus on that task, get it done. Then if you've got more time, another break, do the same thing. Go back to your list and go. So the key with this is it recognizes that priority changes and it varies at different times on the basis of the amount of time or resource that you've got available to you in terms of energy, the tools that you might have available to you. You know, if you must have your laptop in order to do something and you're out at the doctor's office and all you have is your cell phone, well, then you can't work on that next action. You've got to pick the things that you can do with the tools that you have at hand. And what ends up happening is your project list typically gets long as you're going through this method. You might have 50, you might have 100, you might have 200 projects on your projects list. And as you're reviewing that project list and deciding what the next actions are to advance those, that next actions list should actually be quite short, because it's literally what's the next action to advance your agenda. Not the next 10 actions, but what's the next one action. And so my actions list is actually quite short. Usually that's 15 to 20 items out of my 100, 150 projects. So that way, again, I don't have to filter through all of those projects. I don't have to filter through things that I've delegated to others and I'm waiting for them to get back to me on. I can say, I've got 15 minutes. What are my next actions that I can do? And try to get one of them done in that moment. And so it just filters your attention down to those things that you can actually do as time is available throughout your schedule. And now comes the last part of this method in this system. And this is really for me, it was one of the hardest parts to commit to doing it. And it's the review process. Because as I intimated at the beginning, you will fall off the wagon. If you love this process like I did when I first saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I need. I need to do this. And how I did it is I added extra time to my day. And I came in every single day to collect and process and organize and plan for about an hour and a half every single day before I would then, the rest of the workday would get started. And so that daily review process was extremely important to me. So you've got a daily review cycle, and then you've also got a weekly review cycle. You could have a quarterly review cycle. You can have an annual review cycle. But we're going to focus on the ones that are shorter term in nature here with this next section. And it's really about making sure that you stay current and that you've got your system up to date so that way you know what to do. Okay, so I talked about my daily review. This is really about your weekly review. Okay, and I schedule this on Friday afternoons, typically from 1 to 2:30. I might adjust it slightly from 2 to 3, to 4, whatever the time frame might be. But every Friday, I empty all of my inboxes. I get to zero. Everything that's in my head, all the meeting notes, all the voicemails, all the emails that I didn't get to and process throughout the week, all the project notes that I took during project meetings throughout the week. Figure out what's actionable. And I review then, after I've collected again, I process all of those, I get them into my system. And now I review and update my project list, I review and update my action list, I review and update my waiting for list, I look at my calendar for the next week and make sure that it's advancing my key priorities. I look at my longer term goals, my quarterly goals, and say, am I advancing those appropriately? Do I need to be working on those in the next week? And start to schedule those things in. So that way you can get to the actions that are most important to you. Because ultimately, at least in a role like I have, I'm paid for results, not for, there's no way that I could get everything done, right? There are more ideas, more potential projects, more risks than you can possibly get done, even if you work 24 hours a day. So the key to this system is providing transparency to what you have on your plate, so that way you can choose what's most important at the time, at the moment, so that way you're advancing the right things in your work on a daily basis. Okay, so what do you do first? Let me pause here for questions and comments or feedback. because I haven't seen anything come across the chat yet or heard Bill stopping me. So let me pause because we went through a lot of different content here in these 6 phases. How to dig out of the hole that you're in first. So let's say you were like me and you had about 1,700 emails in your inbox and you had all these lists, and where the heck do you start? Well, there's a couple of different ways to do it. 1349, way to go, Amanda. The first thing that you've got to do, right, is you've got to dedicate some time to doing this. You've got to collect everything and get it in front of you. And literally at the time that I first did this, I grabbed a ream of paper from the printer, and on each page I wrote down one project or one action or something like that. I had my list of projects and actions. I took all of my inputs and I collected them, and then I processed them into this system. Now, if I had 1,350 emails, what I would do is I would just declare email bankruptcy as another option. And you just put them into an archive folder and forget about them. If they're really that important, somebody's going to ask about them again. Okay, so there's 2 ways to do this. One, what I did is I went through everything. I couldn't live with the stress of potentially not doing something that was important. So I processed all of my inbox. It took me an entire weekend. Okay, so I dedicated a weekend to going through. I came into the office away from the distractions at home, and nobody in the office, spent a Saturday, spent a Sunday, and got current. But the other alternative is literally to declare email bankruptcy and just say, you know what, I'm going to commit to this system and I'm going to start today and try from the beginning, and you archive everything. And then maybe you can go to your archive for half an hour a day or an hour a day and slowly work at chipping it down. But more than likely, if you've got 1,500 items, a lot of those are probably repeats or things that are old. Maybe you've done them, maybe you haven't. Most are for reference. Okay, yeah, you don't want to use your email inbox for reference. You need a separate system for referencing. And all I do as well, I don't use folders. In Outlook, I have an inbox. I have maybe 2 or 3 folders that are critical, things that I want to save. I have a to read folder. I have one for administrative items, like where to send my expense report to, because I may have forgotten how to do that. Things that I need to know, but I don't want to go searching for. And then everything else I just put into an archive folder, because the search functions today in Outlook and other things like that are so good, thank you, Krista, that you can find whatever you're looking for very quickly, frankly, faster than you can use the folders. And so that's what I would end up doing, is I would put everything into an archive folder and it'll be there for you. So your inbox is only things that you have not yet processed, right? It's a collection tool, not a reference tool, not a storage tool. Great question. Okay, Dale, your question here, the hour and a half at the start of each day, was that in addition to my work day? It was in the addition at the beginning. Okay, because I had a schedule. It was already full. I needed quiet time with nobody else interrupting me to kind of learn these habits. And so, yeah, I did it by coming in early at the beginning. Now, my system is that I'll start my workday at home. I'll spend 10 to 15 minutes with my phone. I will clear my inbox out, process that, take care of any of those under 2-minute actions. I look at my calendar, assess my priorities for the day, so that when I actually walk physically into the office, I've already done it. But now it only takes me about 15 minutes a day. Okay, but it took a long time at the beginning to develop the habits and to get used to them, and to frankly understand the difference between a project and an action. And so if we go back to the organized thing, between something that's reference versus something that's actionable, and to really figure out how to use this tool in this system. But that is what I did at the beginning, is I just came in at 6 and would work for an hour and a half processing and organizing and planning, so that way then I could start the day knowing where everything was and what was needed to be done. Great questions. What else? Does anybody believe that it can actually be done? Because at least for me, when I looked at this at the beginning, it seemed like magic, right? This concept of inbox zero. I first heard about it from a blogger by the name of Merlin Mann, M-A-N-N. He had a blog back in the day called 43 Folders, and that's when you, in a paper-based system, you would have 43 folders, 1 through 31, and for each day of the month, and then January through December, so 12 more folders equals the 43. And you would take your piece of papers from your inbox and you would file them on the day that they needed to be done. But in any case, as technology advanced, he came up with this concept, was the first time that I ever heard about it, of inbox zero. And I don't hit it every day. I don't hit it every month. But when you do, oh my gosh, is it amazing. My general preference, I like to keep my inbox down to 1 screen or less of unprocessed items. And if I'm 1 screen or less, to me, that is inbox zero, that I feel pretty darn good about that. Okay. Thanks, Bill, for the hint. Really, there's not much content left. Now is the wrap up, and it's the, so what do I do first? And we've covered a little bit about that. I'll say it one more time. You've got to collect everything. Write down everything that you have on your plate, get it into your inbox to process, and then follow the steps. Remember, do email less, make sandwiches more, no fiddling with your tools, and have a little bit of fun while you're doing this, because the work never ends. There's always more to do than you can possibly get done. And sometimes while we say this is the GTD system, the getting things done system, I like to think of it as the choosing what not to do system more than the getting things done system. So thank you for your questions and engagement so far. I know we're coming close on the time, so are there more questions that you may have? Or Bill, any other comments that you want to add as we come to close up?
It looks like, yep, I think you got that. Go back to the process slide. I do want to let folks know, there's been a couple of folks asked. Again, reminder, we are recording this, and so a recording will be available. I know there were a couple of folks that joined a little bit after the start, so we will have a recording and we'll make that available to all of the folks who are participants. But we also are just launched a public website where we're making the recordings of the webinars available.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bill. So the question there was to see the process slide, but the other one that I'm going to put up here is the project, or is the organize slide. And this, I would say, is kind of the bare minimum to have projects, next actions, and waiting for. Those 3 categories are really great. Now, I have more categories than that, but those are the core to really get started in your processing and your organization of all of your work. And in particular, many people who have taken this and adopted this for themselves, they say that that waiting for category is like a godsend. The light bulb goes on and they're like, oh my gosh, I no longer, am thinking about who do I need to follow up with on what. You've got this great list that, again, when you've got time and you're looking for something to do, you can go, boom, who do I need to follow up with today on that particular item?
Jason, there was a question about whether we can share your slide deck. Is that something you're comfortable with?
Yes. Yeah. So the key here, I talked to Bill about this before. This isn't 100% David Allen, but a lot of it comes out of that system. And so, I'd make sure to reference that both at the beginning and the end. And plus, you can also go to the web and go to his website. He's got some great job aids that are free. You don't have to pay for. With different elements of this process to give you some more hints and a little bit more depth on how to make this, something that works for you.
Okay, so I will, Jason has shared the slides with me, and so I will be sure to pass those along to those participants who are interested in receiving that. You can just drop me an email message at arnoldwh@alma.edu or the alumni office email account, and we'll be sure to get that to you. Any other questions at this point? If not, obviously there's Jason's email address on the screen, and he has made himself available to respond to those and use his system to keep him organized. So again, I just want to say thank you to Jason for taking the time to do this. It was outstanding, very helpful, and obviously by the number of participants that we've had in, there's a lot of other people who are looking to improve their productivity. And so Jason, thank you for giving of your time to support other alums and friends of the institution.
Yes, thank you, and you're quite welcome.